following is a conversation. It has the features of any conversation, such as imperfectly expressed thoughts, ill-considered opinions, and the notions of several sleep-deprived brains. Try not to get your stethoscope in a twist about it.
On today's show, we're talking about accommodations for disability in medical school and how all that works. But first, look around you, everybody. See all this technology that we're using? I want to throw it in the trash because the university decided that my desktop computer wasn't to be trusted anymore. And then a horde of IT guys came in and took it away, and they have to reformat my hard drive and and it's very traumatic. And I've spent the last, I don't know, I would say 5-6 work hours dealing with all the knock-on effects of that. So today's show's gonna be a little rough because I didn't have a ton of time to prepare, but we're gonna soldier through. And I just want to say that I feel a little insulted that the university doesn't trust me anymore. The university's network doesn't trust me anymore.
Do you want to hear?
It literally said, the error I got was literally something like, this computer has trust issues.
Well, I will say they're changing it for all of us, where I think we have to do something new with Duo Push. I think there's a lack of trust across the board.
I feel untrustworthy. I felt, I didn't do anything with my computer, I think. But, whenever this sort of thing happens to me, whether it's computers or life, I always feel guilty. As though, if I get, I don't know, if there's a cop following me, instantly I'm like, well, I'm going to jail.
I absolutely feel the same way. I must have done something illegal if they're behind me. Yeah.
Do you want to hear?
Very relatable.
Yeah.
I'm working for the CDC virtually.
Yeah.
And while technically I can access a virtual desktop, it is not really necessary for my role. And so I just do everything on my own, and then I just email it back and forth on the CDC emails. I've gotten 15 emails from the CDC to my CDC email saying, your desktop needs to be updated. We're going to come and update your operating system. It's like Windows 11. I'm like,
come for it.
No, you're not. I don't have a desktop. I don't have Windows 11. This isn't, I don't know what you want. So they're updating some computer for somebody, but it's not.
I'm here
me.
in Iowa.
Yeah.
I know you guys don't have enough to do lately. So.
Couldn't possibly be busy over there.
No.
Meandering in the margins of medicine, it's the Shortcoat Podcast.
Weird news,
fresh views,
helpful clues, and interviews.
By students, for students.
Subscribe to our weekly show at theshortcoat.com.
Welcome back to the Shortcoat Podcast, the show that gives you an inside look at medical school from the students drinking from that fire hose. It's a production of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. I'm Dave Etler. With me today in the SCP studio, it's M1 Emily Baniewicz.
Yes, sir.
M3 Jeff Goddard is here.
Hello.
PA1 Chloe Kepros joins us.
Hi, everyone.
And joining us in the form of ones and zeros, we've got M3 Madeline Ungs.
Hello.
Shortcoats, if you hear something that makes you excited or perk up or whatever, it makes you have a feeling of any sort, even if it's not a good one. If there's something you want to hear about on a future show, there's something you want to tell me, I would love that. I would love that. That would make me so happy. Wouldn't that make you happy?
Yeah, of course.
That would make Emily very
you don't have
happy.
To keep coming up with
it
ideas.
would make me feel perky.
It would make Jeff feel perky. So visit theshortcoat.com/tell us. Share your ideas, thoughts, rants, peculiar notions that nobody else has. Whatever you want to share with us. It'll help us make a show that's more yours than mine, and I love you for that. Okay, so as I said, we're going to talk about mostly about accommodations for disability in medical school today. Recently, I got a chance to sit down with Jenna Ladd. She's our accessibility specialist in our medical student counseling center. Because while we've spoken about disability before on the show, we didn't have any of our counselors available to help us out with that. Now, Jenna is a licensed mental health therapist who started working here in the last year. She's pretty cool. I like her. She wasn't available to actually be in the studio with us today, I assume because she's working with people. But I've got some clips here to share. But before we do, who feels comfortable talking about their particular disability or where they intersect with this topic today?
I requested accommodations for both preclinicals and clinicals, and definitely felt like I had no idea what I was doing, especially that first year. Yeah, and we didn't have Jenna when I started, so it wasn't quite as easy, I feel like, as it is now.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. It's definitely it's fun looking back and seeing all the changes that have been made. But when I started, I kind of just basically my accommodations are a little bit different. They're just having access to a chair, basically, being able to take breaks. And I just hadn't heard of anyone that had done that before, I guess. I kind of came in and I just wasn't super connected.
No. You didn't have any accommodations in undergrad?
I'm trying to think. I did. For one lab class, I did have accommodations.
Yeah, okay. All right.
I had like a chair in a chemistry lab where they normally don't have any chairs.
I like chairs.
So I did do that.
I don't know why chairs are a problem. You know, you go to the grocery store and everybody's standing up. I'm like, give them some chairs. Can't they have chairs?
Cashier, yeah.
Why can't they have chairs?
That's why I support Aldi.
Yeah.
I can talk a little bit. My like quote unquote, I don't know, experience with disability and accommodations has been more with like the mental health side of things. Yeah. I have like generalized anxiety disorder and have kind of had that and been working with it since I was pretty young. And so I feel pretty confident with advocating for myself and comfortable, I guess, with like seeking out resources and talking about things like therapy. But that's something that I know I've talked with peers here who are not as comfortable with addressing those things, and maybe like medical school or PA school is the first time that they've really experienced a need to kind of utilize counseling or different things. And so
something about med school brings out the mental health issues.
yeah, that is fair. And so I guess I kind of appreciate the ability to talk about my experience to make it more normalized and hopefully for people to seek out those resources, but also Carver has a lot of great resources, including Jenna. And so making sure that people are kind of aware of those and how they can access them too.
Yeah.
I would say that I don't think necessarily that medical school can bring some of those things out, that's for sure. But I think one of the challenges that we run into as students is that if you're in medical school, you're probably above average intelligence, like you're kind of a smart cookie. And so you've been able to skate by in life on your ability to just like get through because you're smart. And you get to a point where everybody around you is smart and it's just getting really, really hard. You can't just skate by on natural ability. And all of a sudden those deficits in whatever area become much more apparent and a little bit more challenging to deal with.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. And everyone's experience is different in the sense that I feel like my anxiety was maybe the worst earlier in life from different experiences outside of medical school. And so I came in with like a game plan and knowing like what I needed to address, what I needed for resources. And then there's other people who kind of come in and they've really never had a problem with it or a problem that's great enough to address it. And it kind of comes out.
I have several accommodations at the university, including like chairs and such, because I have a disability that I pass out a lot. So I remember like I was initially like scared to ask for some accommodations, like some stuff I was like, yeah, I know I need this. And then like, but I don't want to like have to tell clinicians. So I just was like, oh, I don't need, like we have to shadow once a month. And like my first shadowing experience, like I was standing up for too long and I passed out like at the shadowing experience. And then after that I was like, hey Jenna, so like can we meet again? I think I have some more stuff I need to add to the list. But if it like wasn't for Jenna, like it would have probably been way, way harder. So like when Madeline was talking about like how she didn't have a Jenna, I feel like the process became so much more streamlined. And so like I'm grateful for that.
I just want to say it's so cool to hear from someone else that uses like a chair as an accommodation, because I just felt like no one had ever done that, even though I know that's not true. You know there are people that have done it. It's just not been like widespread
like
knowledge.
My first meeting with Jenna was like over Zoom over the summer, like right after she got hired. And I was like, yeah, so like I have POTS, which is like postural tachycardia syndrome. And I was like, so if I stand up for too long, like I'll just pass out. She's like, so I actually have no idea how to like navigate that process. But she was like, before class even started, she was emailing like anatomy professors and was like, is this something that we could do? Like, how could we make this as accessible as possible? And so like, there's some stuff that you could foresee, but like, I was like, oh, I didn't foresee passing out, standing up for too long in like an outpatient setting when I was shadowing. But like having that contact person, like I would have taken weeks to like figure out who was the right person to contact to get that done. But like now since there's a centralized person, it like makes the process so much easier.
Let's play a clip from my discussion with Jenna, and it's just a definition of disability. So let's hear from Jenna.
According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, a person has a disability if they have a significant functional impairment in one or more areas of life. And this idea of like it being a significant impairment shouldn't be a really demanding standard to meet. But not every condition meets that standard. So for example, if someone had like a really minor pollen allergy, that would not be considered a disability.
She talks about significant impairment. In the context of medical school, I feel like you've sort of discussed that a little bit.
Well, that is kind of what I was thinking about before is that, you know, once you get to this level, certain things change, right? So like, for example, if you have POTS and you have a stay-at-home desk job, it may not come up as much, right? But if you're in a field like medicine where, you know, we're on our feet a lot, all of a sudden we need to address this, right? I kind of struggled a little bit with depression when I was in undergrad. But I have, like a lot of our peers, a certain level of intellectual ability that I could kind of skate by on, you know, I vegged on my couch for the last 72 hours because I couldn't convince myself to get up and move, but you know, I can cram in those last 4 hours and do okay on that exam or that essay, and so it was okay. I can't do that in medical school, right? So like, we're at a level that significant impairment is kind of relative to the requirements of your life, and as a medical student, the requirements have gone up.
I feel like it's subjective of like, if you've been chronically ill for so long, like what you just picture as like you are normal, that would be significantly disabled to someone else that like was all of a sudden diagnosed with this for the first time. So like, for instance, like the last few weeks, like I also have Crohn's disease, and I was having probably one of the worst like flare-ups that I've had in years. And so like, I really haven't been able to like eat substantial food in 2 weeks. And a lot of people were just like, how are you like still coming to class? And like, how are you doing this? And I was like, I don't know anything else besides this at this point.
I was going to say, like, if I suddenly had Crohn's disease, I would be probably like laid out.
Yeah.
You know,
but like,
I would be a disaster.
But like, if it's your normal, like it is a disability in terms of like, if when I first got diagnosed with it, but now it's like, well, I don't really know how to like live in like another setting. So I'm like, this is just like how it is. And you just like go with the flow. But I feel like that initial like few times to like diagnose, like it is very significantly disabling, especially when you have to like figure out how you're going to live your life now. But like once you just get into the swing of things, you're just like, you don't know anything different at that point, and it becomes like way easier to just like maintain.
I think also on the like maybe another aspect of that kind of discussion, like I have friends and family members who are on the spectrum with autism, and I think sometimes we like are trying to move away from the term high functioning, and the reason for that is that like the term really describes that like as an outsider you seem like you're doing okay to me, like you don't seem to be disabled, things are not affecting you. And the reality oftentimes of disability is the fact that internally I'm dealing with a lot, and I'm managing a lot, and I'm juggling a lot, and it's really very difficult on me, but that isn't always something that exteriorly is visible to people around me. And so I think it's a good thing to talk about with like that like significant impairment. It's not something that has to be visible to others for it to still be significant, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of a fun conversation. I have a couple of friends two brothers who had autism that I grew up with, and we went to church together every Sunday and all that. One of them would describe himself as high functioning, and the other one as more low functioning. And I think for a lot of people, the value of saying this one's the high functioning one was trying to help him feel like, you know, to empower, you know. This kind of goes back to the whole, gosh, what's the word when you want to do something but unintended consequences. There we go. Sorry, took me a second. These are the unintended consequences of trying to provide compassion and appropriate language to help one person, but then, you know, obviously this is affecting a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think as a general rule too, I just try to like talk to each person as an individual about what language is most important to them, because it can vary. And like we talk about that a lot when we talk about speaking to like LGBTQ plus patients, and how like different generations use different terms that to them are empowering, but maybe to another generation wouldn't be. So it is kind of case by case basis, can be a good way to do that, I guess.
Well, medical schools in the US anyway have these so-called technical standards. sort of meant to specify the abilities and skills that applicants and students have to meet in order to learn medicine at that school. And one feature of the standards is the ability to sort of satisfy them through alternate means when the student's ability, and this is the word that they use, is compromised by their disability. So often that means finding accommodations the college can make to help level the field for the student. We've talked about, chairs, right? We've talked about other things. Here's Jenna's sort of example of that, or an analogy that she thinks about.
In terms of accommodations, I really like to think, they're academic adjustments, right? Or auxiliary aids that people use. And what they're intended to do is just give people who have disabilities equal access to the curriculum. And I want to highlight that we're not guaranteeing success for students with accommodations, it's just giving them an equal shot. An analogy that I like to use a lot is it's like giving left-handed scissors to a left-handed person. Doing that doesn't guarantee that they're going to be able to cut a piece of paper, but it's going to give them the same chance to be able to cut the piece of paper as a person who has access to right-handed scissors and is right-handed.
As a left-handed, I did not know left-handed scissors were a thing until 5th grade. And I went shopping for school supplies. And this is 5th grade is when you start, your mom gives you a little bit more freedom of what you're going to choose. I remember being in the Target section, and I was like, there's left-handed scissors? I was like, no wonder. I remember kindergarten, I was terrible at cutting. And I was like, wow, this is a game changer. Do I still own them? No, I've just gotten used to using right-handed scissors. But I was mind blown that this was an option.
I was going to ask, were you more the type to use the right-handed scissors with the right hand, or were you obstinate enough to use them with your left hand anyway?
Yeah, no, I did. I used right-handed scissors with my left hand. Yeah.
Same.
This is branching from that discussion because I am right-handed, so I'm not in the group. But I think it's such a good example of just the equality versus equity, that sometimes we kind of really focus on equality for everyone, and it's not a bad thing to focus on, but understanding, I guess, that equality being everybody gets the same exact thing, and then equity being more everybody gets what they need to be at equal footing, equal starting ground. Yeah. And I think sometimes that's kind of the focus that when we talk about accommodations, it is good to kind of define that we're just equaling that starting point and equaling the barriers, or removing barriers that someone has that somebody else doesn't have to deal with. And it's a good point that it's not we're going to be oh, we'll make sure this student does well. No, we're just making sure that they have the opportunity to do well.
There's also so many forms that you have to fill out and approval processes that are in place to get accommodations in medical school, where it's no one is going to be doing this unless they're I know that this is actually what I need to succeed. I feel a lot of misconceptions. People are people just want extra time testing accommodations because then they'll do better, but they don't actually need them. The kids that need them are going to go through the steps to actually do it. And then, because there's documentation you have to do. It's not you can just be yeah, I did bad on one exam. Maybe if I get extra time, then I do better. Yeah. That could be true, but you're not just going to email Jenna and be hey guys, can I get extra time just to see if it's better? There's a process in place to make sure that the kids that need it get the things that they actually need.
There's a lot more to this interview than I was able to sort of get ready for today's show. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the whole thing sort of at the end, so that if you really want to listen to all of the things that Jenna had to say about this topic, you can. And among those things were, sort of the process that we use here at CCOM to go through that. But my impression from her discussion is that it's not an easy, sort of one meeting and done kind of thing. Do you think the med school environment is I think we've already said that the med school environment is special compared to other education environments for people with disabilities. Here's what Jenna had to say about that.
There are special considerations for medical school for sure. Because if you think about it, once people enter into the clinical stage of their curriculum, they're operating in a lot of different environments, right? You might be in a family care clinic, you might be in an operating room, you might be in the emergency department, and all of that looks different. Whereas in undergrad, it's mostly didactic instruction, you're in a classroom, you're in a lecture hall, right? And so depending on the person's needs, there are sometimes different accommodations that are needed for that clinical setting.
So maybe Madeline, you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have stuff I want to say about this. So I'll say, even like right before going into clinicals, I was so nervous because I still felt like I didn't know what I was doing.
I feel like nobody knows what they're doing, but yeah, fair enough.
Nobody ever knows what they're doing. That's the secret that I have learned throughout med school.
Yeah. That's the secret of life, by the way. Like, none of us really, like, we have ideas, you know, if we've stumbled over things enough times that we're like, okay, I kind of know what to expect about how unprepared for this I am. But yeah, I feel like it's true all the time.
Yeah. But for medical school, clinicals are very unique because you're in so many different environments. It's like, it's impossible to prepare for every environment. And before you're even in there, you don't always know what you're walking into, if that makes sense. So you might want to be like, oh, you know what? I really need another accommodation that I just wasn't anticipating because I just wasn't sure what I was going to be doing. And I think that's one of the harder parts about accommodations in medical school is just navigating the clinical aspect. And not only are you in so many different environments, you're going to have to involve different people, which was also kind of hard for me to figure out. I will say my advice is to use those clerkship directors, those physicians that are, you know, overseeing the whole clerkship. Because if you get in contact with them and say, this is what I need, this is what, you know, my accommodations are probably going to look like, that came in handy for me, because then the clerkship director can contact the relevant people that you're going to interact with instead of you having to individually talk to each instructor, which would be exhausting.
And also not super effective.
Director to kind of do that.
I was going to say it wouldn't be particularly effective in a clinical situation because, you know, like if you're working with a resident for a couple of days, you'd have to it'd be like bringing it up all over again. You'd have to sort of go through this conversation with them about what that looks like for you. They would have to, you know, sort of make adjustments on the fly when they're not really prepared to do that. I think one of the things that Jenna wanted everybody to know was, you know, get in touch early. Even if you're not quite sure what that means, get in touch early so that, you know, at least you can get the paperwork and all that arduous stuff out of the way. And then as you come across issues, then it'll be a lot easier to, you know, sort of adjust on the fly than it would be to, you know, start that process like in your first rotation. You know, that would be kind of a disaster.
Do you mind if I ask what field of medicine you're interested in?
Yeah. So I actually had a traumatic brain injury in 2018, and so that's like I developed POTS like after that, and so I'm really interested in neuro. And I feel like a lot of people like, I'm like, oh, you need a chair. Oh, you can't like stand up for super long, or like, and I can, like, compared to like where I was a few years ago, like I'm miles ahead. But it's like, I know going in that like, I'm probably not going to be a transplant surgeon that is on their feet for a 13-hour surgery. And that's fine with me. So I feel like a lot of people like, oh, like, why are you going to like, I feel like, I don't know. I've had a few people, not like in medical school, obviously, but like, oh, like, why do you think you can be a doctor? And it's like, of course you can. It's just like your field of like what you may be physically able to do might be slightly different, but like, I don't really want to be a 12-hour transplant surgeon, like, anyway. Like, it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah, but what if they start doing brain transplants more routinely?
No.
I thought of, you know, there are certain disabilities that would make it incredibly difficult to do certain aspects of the training, especially in the clinical realm, or impossible to do it. Certainly it's, you know, I've had a resident pass out during a procedure. It's not ideal for the surgical suite, right? But needing to sit down during that procedure and not being able to get a great view of the field, frankly, I mean, I don't want to be too much of a heretic over here, but like I didn't find my surgical rotation to be terribly enlightening.
I've never heard that before.
And I could stand up and look down in it the whole time, you know? So like, so my point being that like, I don't think that you're going to be missing much. But certainly I can see the argument that some people would make that, you know, when we're trying to parse out what reasonable accommodations can be made, what reasonable accommodations should be made. You know what I mean? Depending on what the particular deficit in ability might be, whatever the technical deficit. I think your situation or Madeline's situation is a great opportunity to discuss that, where you're both interested, as far as I know, in fields that require maybe some walking, but a lot of sitting as well, which is good. because the field is appropriate for what you're able to do, right? So I don't know that it necessarily matters too much about, like we can give you these accommodations on surgery because it's not going to affect your ability to be a world-class med-peds physician, Madeline, or a phenomenal neurologist. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to think about as well when we discuss like who like should be able to go into these roles, and if you're kind of excluded from one field or specialty down the line, should that mean that you can't go through the process whatsoever? Because what comes to mind for me is like how important it is that we have more people who have disabilities, who live that lived experience, who are then caring for people with those disabilities. Like, I think it's awesome that like going into neuro, you're like, I've experienced this. And so I'm able to really relate to my patients on that level. Because that's something that can be really hard as a provider, is being able to like engage with your patient's lived experience, because you're seeing them in this like clinical setting that's outside of that. So
yeah, and in fact, Jenna agrees. Here's what she had to say about that.
I think what I really want to say is that you belong here. It's important that you're here in medical school. There's been, well, first I'll say that we know that people with disabilities experience health disparities, okay? In 2023, the NIH said that people with disabilities are a population of folks that experience health disparities. They found that people with disabilities are less likely to receive preventative care and more likely to have unmet healthcare needs due to the cost, and experience ableism and stigma. So, and those disparities are even worse for people who experience other types of, or who have other marginalized identities.
I mean, there you go. She agrees.
It brings to mind, we did have a panel of like families with like family members with disabilities, as well as like patients with disabilities, which was a really great experience, I think, for everyone. And something that they talked about is it can be really hard because we get into this mindset of like how you do things, like how you conduct like a patient exam visit and stuff. And one of the parents was saying, like, with my son, like he struggles with such and such thing with the dentist. And they were like, well, we don't have to do it the way that we always do it with everyone. Like, what if we changed it to this because it makes it easier for him? And so it's being willing to think outside of the box with your patients. And again, I think it's awesome when you have some of that lived experience, because you have had to think outside of the box for yourself.
You're somewhat prepared for that.
Yeah.
Even if the disability is different from your own.
Right.
You can, you sort of got that in the back of your mind, and you've kind of worked out that sometimes things need to be different.
Exactly.
And you're taught, like, I think in med school, you're sort of taught, like, this is the way to do things, right? Mm-hmm. Do it this way every time, and you won't have any problems, like the physical exam. Like, there's an order in which you go through things. And I think that's fine when you're first learning, but ultimately, hopefully, you're mentally flexible enough to sort of shift things around.
Yeah, I noticed with myself, we just had like a patient encounter with like the PETAs, so they're like not real patients, but
these are the patient instruction. What is it?
I don't know.
Patient. It's not.
They're like trained
actors.
Trained patient actors.
Yeah.
I know if you call them fake patients, they don't care for that.
That's not particularly.
It doesn't go well.
He's like, I've
not
learned
personal
from experience,
but I do have a friend that had a bad time.
Patient education training associates. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sure.
That sounds right.
That sounds
four
great
letters
to me.
that spell PETA.
Let's pretend that that's what it is.
Yeah.
And we had one who came in with a musculoskeletal issue. Like, they had like really severe pain was the idea. And so ours, first of all, great acting, because I really believed it.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
And second of all, like, it was a really good test for me of being like, how are you most comfortable, and how can we like modify this exam? Because you do get into your set of like, I'm going to do this and do this and do this. And then all of a sudden the patient's like, this is like the worst position for me to be in, and you're keeping them there. And it's like, how can we like modify things? So I do think that there's a good emphasis on that, I guess, being focused on in the curriculum, because they did that very purposefully. So
yeah. There's a reason they chose that particular guy.
I did really appreciate the lesson that you learn really quickly. I think if you'd have in preclinicals, you certainly will in clinicals, that whatever hurts, you go there last. Like you just do all of the things that don't hurt first, and then do that at the very end, so that you can make sure that you're not, like you said, keeping them in an uncomfortable position for longer, or poking and prodding more than you need to.
Or just like establishing a relationship before you before you make
I mean, you should establish a relationship before you touch any of your patients. I personally think,
I try to make people feel comfortable before I make them feel uncomfortable in life. That's
a good feeling.
and I
don't always succeed.
Can I ask a philosophical question?
Yeah.
This is a counter argument. Sorry, Madeline.
Yeah, here we
She's
go.
had to put up with me for a few years. She's used to this. This is a counter argument to a lot of what we've talked about today, because I know that somebody is going to hear this podcast and think it, and I want to address it. I'm going to start with you, Madeline, because you are the most thoughtful person I know. But certainly everybody, including Dave, might have some good thoughts on this. Sorry, Dave.
It's true.
So the amount of energy and resources that we are putting into accommodations for disabilities is substantial. I think appropriate, but substantial, right? The question might come up when we start talking about things like equality and equity. Isn't equality enough that everybody has the opportunities to succeed? Why should we be putting so much effort into assuring that people get to the same starting line or even the same finish line if there are other applicants that could do the job without those accommodations? Should we not just prioritize those other applicants? Why are we putting all of this energy into assuring equity for students with disabilities? Does that make sense?
I think you're right. I think it's a question that somebody
it's a question.
out there
Yeah,
might
it's
have.
a question that I spend more time on Reddit than any sane medical student should.
No.
But among other things, these are the kinds of conversations that medical students have because, or pre-meds or whatever, or even, we just got to the end of a cycle for undergrad applications, and there are a lot of very upset students who on paper look very good, and they're competing against people they feel have a perceived advantage because of the idea of equity, right? For whatever the reason is. I personally feel like strong conversations should be had with these people, but this is an opportunity to address their concerns.
Sure.
So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah. Did you have something you wanted to respond, Madeline?
I'm trying to think. I just feel like I'm not very eloquent, so I'm trying to think of a good answer to that. But I feel like there was a part of Jenna's interview that she talked about, like providers and patients coming from the same background. Sometimes you get better results that way.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an advantage to having disabled physicians. And so I think because of that advantage and because of possibly improved patient care that can come of that the energy into supporting those physicians is what word am I looking for here?
Worth it?
It's justified.
Is worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what you're getting at, and what I think of is that the end goal of medicine is quality medical care and quality access to medical care. At least in my opinion, it's this is kind of a basic human right that we are striving towards people having access to. And when we have this really homogenous population of doctors or practitioners in general who all kind of look the same, come from similar backgrounds, whether that be racial, socioeconomic, ability levels, as much as we're all striving, the goal is for us to be able to engage with people from different backgrounds and learn about them and really do our best to empathize. It is really beneficial to have a practitioner who truly understands your culture and your experience. And like you said, I think that there are statistics that prove that and that show quality outcomes for patients when they have a provider who comes from their same background. So I think that there's a worth it and benefit in that. And I also think some of that kind of stuff comes from the idea DEI is bad because if we include people and we have equity and things like that, it gives someone a leg up. And again, it comes back to picturing that if you're having two people who are going to race against each other in a sprint, and one person has a bunch of obstacles in their way, and then you remove the obstacles so that they both no longer have obstacles, all you're doing is making it equal footing to start with, but you're not in any way giving them an advantage over the other person. They were just at a disadvantage before.
Another thing I was thinking while you were talking is we're told at the beginning of medical school that we're going to learn more from our classmates than, any of the curriculum that the school teaches us. And I found that definitely to be true. If all of your classmates are exactly like you, what else are you going to learn? I felt like I've learned so much from just our different classmates that are from all over the country and have so many different backgrounds, and disability plays into that too. We teach each other so much. And I think that's why it's important to have, a diverse medical school class, because we learn so much from each other.
I want to play something that Jenna had to say about misconceptions of disability. Maybe that's, I can't remember if that's relevant, but it probably is.
It's the same disability overarching.
I would bet it could fit into the same podcast for sure.
Yeah.
Same episode, possibly.
I think probably.
I believe it.
Here we go.
There are two major ones that I think of. I think the first is this equation that we often make with like disability equals inability. And sure, people with disabilities do by definition experience an impairment in at least one area. That's true. And also they are exceptionally able in many other domains of life. So I think it's really harmful to make assumptions about what someone can or can't do based on their disability status. And then the second thing I would say is this misconception or this myth that among people who don't have disabilities, that like disability rights is an issue that doesn't affect them, right? That's just not true. The World Health Organization has come out and said that disability is a virtually universal experience. And if you think about that, that's true. Lots of people have disabilities their whole life, but lots of other people go on to develop a disability later in life, or maybe they have like a major health event of some kind, or an accident that causes them to develop a disability. So chances are we will all be impacted or already are impacted by disability in some way, and or love somebody who has a disability. So this isn't an other people issue. It's something we should all care about.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, you've talked about your injury that led you to the delightful experience.
Yeah,
POTS.
I feel like...
And sometimes, sometimes these events lead to temporary disabilities, but those are just as important as the sort of long-term disabilities too. Like
if someone like breaks their arm in medical school, they're going to need accommodations just because for physical exam purposes.
Yeah.
Like you're not going to be able to do everything that you need to do if your arm is in a sling and in a cast. So like that in and of itself, like I feel like a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think of like, oh, that's like a disability until like you're using one arm for the first time that you've had to for the next 3 months. And then you're like, oh shoot, like this is way different. So it's like a lot of it is like you're just you're not taking advantage of it, but like you are essentially because you're ignorant to the fact of how much that you are actually able to do. And then as soon as that is taken away in some capacity, then you're like, huh, so yeah, this actually does affect everyone at some point in their lives. Like, I know Jenna was like alluding, it's like a quarter of people at any given point are going to be like identify as having a disability, whether that's like a permanent or transient one. And so like chances are over the course of your lifetime, like Jenna said, like at some point you already are or like will be disabled in some capacity.
I want to point out from my own experience that sometimes if a disability is temporary, you don't know that. I had Guillain-Barré syndrome when in 1995 and was paralyzed for a relatively short time, but long enough for me to hate that. And I also at the time was, and there were all sorts of issues with that because nobody could tell me like how long this was going to last. If you don't know what Guillain-Barré syndrome is, it's an autoimmune disorder where your body attacks the insulation on your peripheral nerves, and basically it can lead to, in my case, it led to full paralysis from the eyebrows down. And that's what we used to say, but basically I could dilate my left pupil. And it's recoverable. But how recoverable and how long that takes is something that nobody can tell. And at the time, coincidentally, I was the manager of a transportation service for people with disabilities. So while I was in recovery, the joke was he's not only the president, he's also a client. But I don't know, that has stuck with me, obviously, in many ways, for a long time. But yeah, I always think about this topic of like, you don't know what life is going to bring you.
I think also alongside that, like a really good thing to talk about here is that sometimes we have this really like independence valued like culture where it's like my ability to do things myself, to take care of myself and to make these like very independent decisions is kind of inherent to my worth almost.
Yeah.
And that is something that's very difficult because I think it like one has to be something that we address in terms of like devaluing people who have different levels of ability, but two, what happens when you get to the point where you are in need of aid from others, and we probably all will get there, and to kind of like think about and address the fact that like, is our worth really wrapped up in our independence, or should we instead recognize that we have some inherent value outside of like what we're able to do, what we're able to accomplish? I don't know. That's something I kind of think about a lot with this is like, I don't think that my worth is in what I can produce. But at the same time, it's something that I think all of us kind of struggle with at times, that kind of feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also like, it's always extremely awkward whenever you first meet someone and you feel like you have to justify the things that you actually like may or may not need. Like, I don't want to go up to like the physician that I'm shadowing and be like, hi, I'm Emily. I'm a first year medical student and I also have POTS. Like if I pass out, it's fine. Like that's like not something that just like rolls off the tongue super easily. But like if you have the standard set in place where like you just know that a chair is going to be there, you don't have to explain why. And I feel like that was like the hardest thing for me to like realize when I first started developing all these chronic illnesses, was just like, I actually don't need to justify it. Like I justified to get the accommodation. I don't need to continue justifying it to like every single person that I interact with.
Yeah.
And so like, if we're talking about like giving people with disability even playing field, like no one with the disability is going to be like, I just love telling everyone about what's different about me. Like that's not a good first impression, but like you're just giving them the option of like, they feel comfortable enough to do that, then they can, but it's not something that they need to do to get like the basic thing that they're like here to get.
Yeah, I can't remember if this is where she said something about that, but let's listen to this.
There's a distinction in terms of what this looks like in the preclinical setting versus when students go to clinical. Yeah. Okay, so in the preclinical setting, curriculum managers, with permission from the student, are notified of the accommodations, okay? And then the curriculum managers help to implement those accommodations, okay? And I notify the curriculum managers. However, when students go to their clerkships, so they start rotating in the hospital, start rotating in family medicine, wherever they are, then it becomes the student's responsibility and decision whether or not they'd like to notify each clerkship of their accommodations. And so, yeah, I think it is definitely about agency. And it's also about just like the nature of each of those clerkship experiences maybe looking a little bit different, and your needs might be different on each of those rotations. So you may decide not to use it for one of them.
But I imagine that students should probably think ahead about that for each clerkship.
For sure.
And maybe talk with you about what that would look like for individual clerkships.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm available as a resource to talk through that. Think through what your needs might be, think through whether it makes sense to have it in place there in case you need it.
Well, that's not precisely what I hoped I was going to play, but
it ties in.
It does. What I was
I know she says later that you don't have to tell every person why you have this accommodation. You just say this is the accommodation.
Yeah, she doesn't, and I think this is a general rule, not just here, but she doesn't tell people, Emily has POTS, but she'll tell them this is the accommodation that we've together agreed upon, and that's as far as it needs to go. I mean, you don't need to.
I think that's the system that we want, right? We don't want people to have to justify the needs that they have in order to get to that level playing field. We got them to a level playing field, and this is what it is, and that's that.
Yeah.
And it's frankly, I mean,
nobody has the right to that information, really.
Yeah. I mean, I admit, like, to a fault, I'm an American. Like, privacy is just something that just, it's mine. You don't have a right to my information unless I want you to have that information, and I don't want to share it. Because sometimes it's hard to share those kinds of things, right? But that's why we need a system where there's somebody who can do that conversation for you in a way that doesn't require you to have to go up to every person and say, this is why I need this thing. I just need to be able to show up and know that it's there.
Yeah. And I think like it's also hard with medical like shadowing and rotations, I feel like there's kind of this like energy in this culture of like you're kind of supposed to be like silently in the background and not bother anyone, and like you're there to watch but like not really take up space. And I think that I can imagine it would be difficult if I had need for certain accommodations that like changed the way that that system normally works, because maybe like old school doctors more so than I would say like nowadays, maybe newer, but might have kind of like this energy of like you're supposed to kind of like be in the back corner and be quiet, and like you're just here to shadow and learn. And so it might not always kind of be acceptable to be like, I actually need to change this system for my like benefit. And so I appreciate that these conversations are starting to happen more and be discussed more. And part of that is also, again, because we have a changing population of people who are within medicine, and we're starting to recognize kind of variation in the experience of people. So
when you guys were researching schools, what were you looking for in these areas? So I mentioned technical standards before. I don't know if the PA program has a similar a similar set of standards.
Yes, we do. I don't know if they vary at all from what's required of medical school, but I know that we have actual technical standards. It's very similar, where it's like you have to meet this kind of ability to do such and such things. So we definitely do. I feel like the biggest thing when I was researching schools, that everyone, no matter if you feel that you have a disability that you'll need accommodations for or not, can keep in mind is that you are interviewing the school just as much as they are interviewing you. So when you're talking to them about their program, like feel free to question them about how they are going to support you, and what those resources look like, because Iowa has impressed me again and again in terms of what resources they have available to us. And one of the biggest things I just talked about is like when I would call the PA program here, like Kayla, who helps run the office, would be so sweet and just like, yeah, like what can I help you with? She remembered me before I was even, accepted to interview. And I would call other programs and they'd be like, look at our website, So I feel like there's something to be said just about that personableness, but also the fact that it was like, we can present you with how we're going to support you through this process, because it is a difficult process.
Should say you are a student in the #1 PA program in the damn country.
Yeah, that has nothing to do with me, though. That has to do with our awesome faculty.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm just happy to be here. So,
but what about what about you guys? What were you and Madeline too? What were you looking for, if anything, in a school, and was it easy to find?
I don't have a great answer to this. I did, look on schools' websites, but I mean, most schools really didn't have anything on there. There just wasn't a whole lot to look for. But I guess something that I just heard from other people that, I knew went to Iowa was, the administration just really likes hearing what students have to say, and they're very good about listening and making changes. So any kind of culture where the vibe that you can get is they listen to students and they make changes, I think that's a good thing. Even if, there isn't something that says we support, students with disabilities. Of course, that's amazing and that's great. And it'd be great to just know that right off the bat. But also know that you'll find your people and you'll find support. I mean, when I came to Carver, they didn't have this amazing Jenna and everything they have now. So things can always change. Don't be discouraged if you don't see what you're looking for, I guess I want to say.
I'm going to play what Jenna had to say about things to look for.
Couple things to look for. I think checking for transparency about what the process for requesting the accommodations looks like. So it's a green flag if a school has it clearly spelled out, how you go about requesting accommodations for a disability. You'd also want to look for language on their website or in their policy that communicates something that goes beyond legal compliance, right? So look for language that communicates that the institution is interested in facilitating access, who wants to do more for students with disabilities and chronic illness than simply following the letter of the law. And
that's something that, even if it's not sort of readily apparent on the website, you should probably be asking for during your interviews, like, and if the person you're asking doesn't know the answer to the question, they're like, I don't know, but I know exactly who you should talk to. Mm-hmm. Not like, I don't know, that's not an adequate response, I think. Did you guys have something to
I was
add?
just going to say, like, if you look at the student groups, like, obviously every med school has so many, but, like, if there's a medical school that has an affinity group for people that identify with a certain community that you belong to, then I feel like that's a good sign that they're going to support those students. That's not to say if they don't have something that exists like that they don't support you. But I feel like that's a good indicator of, like, oh, like, there's other people here.
Now, I would be like, oh, they have a student group. Does that mean they don't, support people officially?
No, I feel like it's
we have the medical, what is it called? The
medical students with disability and chronic illness, and I started that group.
Yes.
So if you really like a school and they don't have it, start one.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point.
It's been amazing.
You can be the person who brings that like awareness and who brings like people together, because there's probably more people who are experiencing it than just you. So yeah, snaps to starting that group.
if you're at an interview with the school and nothing like that exists, like, that's a great interview question that, like, one will show that, like, you researched the school and that, like, you're gonna bring productive ideas and conversations to school. So I feel like that's great things that they would probably look for in an applicant.
Yeah.
So that would be like a unique question that hopefully that would, like, help you distinguish yourself from the thousands of people of applications that they have to read.
I have found time and again that students are a valuable resource in helping us fill holes that we either, that we didn't quite understand that we had. My 20 years, I've seen time and again students do this and take that role. Not only is that, super helpful, but I think it's also a really good professional quality to have too, is to sort of say, I see this, I want to help alleviate that issue or fill that need. I mean, I just think it's super cool to be able to do that. And I'm really glad that we allow that,
Yeah.
Just as a final thought, because I do have to head out here. I really wanted to echo what Madeline had said about, you want a school that's going to be responsive to you. Mm-hmm. Certainly if there's a group, look on their website and see if there's a student group. Certainly you can start one, but a school that seems accommodating but is incredibly rigid in their accommodations will not serve you as well as a school that doesn't currently have accommodations but is listening to their students. Because individual situations will always trump like whatever's in the bylaws, right? If you have a student that comes in and whatever the current situation is, it doesn't necessarily need to even be a disability, right? We have a student in our class who was a single parent who was pregnant during our first year, and we had to figure out I didn't have to do anything, obviously, right? But as a school, we had to figure out, okay, what are the accommodations for the anatomy lab? Because there are, concerns about the chemicals in pregnancy. What are the accommodations around exams? What are the accommodations around childcare? And the school had to figure that out, but the school was willing to listen. And I think that, much to Iowa's credit, we have an institution that is willing to listen to the needs of the students and accommodate and to change as we go along. So if you're applying to a program, I think that's the very first thing that you ask the other students that are in the program is, how well do they listen to you in situations that haven't come up before?
I have one more thing to play from Jenna's interview. I wanted to ask Jenna how people who don't have experiences with disabilities can support those who do. So let's see what she said about that.
Definitely watch the language that you use. So really making sure that we're using person first language, right?
What does that mean?
Yes. So you would say the person with a disability rather than calling someone a disabled person, right? Because they're a whole human being who happens to have a disability, right? However, there are some exceptions to this, right? So for example, some people who have autism prefer to be called autistic people. But that's not the case for everybody who has autism. So if you're not sure and you have a trusting relationship with someone, you feel comfortable asking what language they like people to use, you could totally ask that question. Because depending on the condition and depending on the disability community, they might prefer different language, but just making sure that you're using first person language making sure that you're using first person language. And then I think also just making sure that you're not making assumptions about what people can and cannot do if they have a disability. So not like rushing to help someone with something when they didn't ask you for help. not assuming that they don't want to participate in something when you haven't asked if they want to participate in something, right?
Christ.
It's Friday afternoon.
So many
You're so
icons,
close.
so many doodads to push. So do you guys feel as though, do you guys feel as though people have been, your peers have been helpful, supportive?
Yeah, I will say people aren't going to know that I struggle with anxiety unless I talk about it, which I do. I'm very vocal, I feel like. And part of that reason is because I've had people come to me and say, I want to go access therapy, but I am kind of nervous. I've never done it. And you've spoken about how comfortable you are. Would you be willing to talk with me about it? So that's kind of partially why for me. But yeah, I would say like people don't necessarily know about what's going on inside my head unless I speak about it. So I don't know if that's a little bit different for your guys' experience with needing some maybe more like visible accommodations at times.
I feel like earlier on in like my recovery, it was very obvious that there was something physically wrong with me, because when I was like, one of the biggest things that I had to like retrain my body on how to do with like is depth perception. So I would simply like walk into doors or walls like very often for the first 2 years after my injury. And so that it's like way easier for someone to believe that something is like, oh my gosh, so sorry,
no problem.
wrong with you. And like now, thankfully, I'm like no longer walking into doors because I went to therapy for
It does seem like something
years.
to be thankful for.
Yeah, for sure. Like knowing where the door is and it actually being in the place where like your brain perceives it being is crazy. And so I feel like now I definitely don't have to like talk about it as much, which is kind of nice that like in college, because I got my injury in college, that's what like everyone knew me as. Whereas like now I feel like I can form an identity like outside of just what had happened to me at that time, which is so nice. And then when I get like the perks of like becoming close enough with someone where I can share that information, then I feel like that it's just like a reassuring thing to them that like one, that they know, like I know I can trust them, and two, that I feel comfortable enough to do so. But it's not something that I feel like I have to disclose to everyone just because of like I'm no longer walking into doors. So like if I want to like pave a new part of my identity for myself, it's nice that I have the opportunity to.
Yeah. I think one of the I will say shortcomings of this episode is that we don't have somebody who has, on the panel today, we don't have somebody who has a visible disability. Mm-hmm. And that often happens when we talk about disability in medicine. And I'm not really sure exactly why, but it is what it is. It may be easier for people to anticipate the kinds of needs that somebody with a visible disability will have. But at the same time, I think to Jenna's point, jumping in with an accommodation that you feel like you want to provide this person may not be the right move.
Yeah, I volunteered in undergrad with L'Arche, is this like the Arch? It's a I don't know. It's an interabled community kind of group that started in France, and that's why it has that name. But it was in St. Louis. It was called Joyful House. It was a house where they had like people who like worked as aides and were trained in that, but they're living in community like in this house with the people who are in need of assistance. And so it's kind of this whole like we are a community, and like while we have different abilities and different needs, like we're not stratifying by like I'm a caregiver and you're like someone who receives that care as much, which was super cool. And I got to like just hang out with the ladies and make dinners, and it was awesome. But one thing that was very like, you would have new volunteers come and they kind of had to learn not to like baby talk at times. Mm-hmm. Some of the women who had very visible disabilities, and there was this assumption that they intellectually were not as capable as they were at times. So as much as visible disabilities can make it easier to anticipate needs, it is hard.
May also bias.
Yeah, there can be bias that comes with that. And so it was like learning to just like learn about the person in front of you and the individual in front of you and what they need and who they are first. Is such a skill.
One of the things I learned, as the manager of that transportation service was, you can't judge people based on the accommodations that they've designed for themselves. Mm-hmm. And you mustn't offer ideas about how people can accommodate themselves. They've probably gone through a very difficult and long process figuring that out, mm-hmm. and discovering the appropriate thing for them. So there's that too, like you might feel helpful in saying, hey, why don't you just use a wheelchair? This is kind of an extreme example, but that's also not great.
Yeah, I think like approaching with curiosity is like a really great way to think of it. Like just be like, how can I help you? Like when someone comes to you and feels comfortable enough to disclose maybe like things they're dealing with that you might not see, or if they are a friend of yours that things are more visible and stuff, just being like, hey, just so you know, like let me know ways that I can help you if you ever need it, or ways that I can best like support you as a friend. It doesn't have to go super deep compared to that. Like you can just let them kind of open up that conversation as they feel comfortable.
Yeah. Well, that's all I had. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to make sure we said today, thinking about this episode?
Just thanks for giving us the platform to talk about it again.
That's our show. Madeline, Emily, Chloe, Jeff, who had to leave, thanks for hanging out with me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And what kind of dirtbag would I be if I didn't thank you, Shortcoats, for making us a part of your week? If you're new here and you like what you heard today, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available, or even janky ones like today's technologically disadvantaged. So, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available. The show is made possible by a generous donation by Carver College Medicine Student Government and ongoing support from the Writing and Humanities program. Our music is by Dr. Box and Atmosphere. I'm Dave Etler, saying don't let the bastards get you down. I'll talk to you in 1 week. Hi, Shortcoats. Look, life in medical education, life in America, life in the world is often difficult. And I often wish I could help. All I have is this podcast, but in my wildest dreams, you have the support you need to lead a life of your choosing. You deserve to be happy, healthy, and successful in whatever ways you define those words. So if you need support because you've experienced racism, discrimination, harassment, mental health crises, I want you to be able to get the help that you need. And so I'm going to put some links in the show notes to some resources that you can use. But the bottom line is that for what it's worth, I see you. I know you're out there. I wish I could do more. Maybe I can in ways that I don't understand yet or know about. But I see you, and I'm glad you're here, and other people are too. This Shortcode podcast is a proud member of the MedEd Media Network. Inspiration, information, and guidance on your journey to medical school and beyond at mededmedia.com.